Let's talk about the needles of Yor Forger from Spy Family. This is the Kitsune clan, a group of sword enthusiasts who like cosplay, reenactment, and historical martial arts. If you have similar interests, feel welcomed. Yor Forger is the mother of the Spy Family, successful as manga and anime, but she's also known as the Thorn Princess because she's using two of these needles to strike down the persons she should kill. Because, in fact, she's an assassin. As a first note, a lot of people put their index finger in the rings. That's not part of the story, and the position of the thorn is much better if you put your thumb into the ring, so we will do so for the rest of the video. With the thumb, the thorn extends more or less straight down. With the index finger, it extends backwards, which is bad for the range. Putting your thumb into the ring prohibits sliding down along the needle. That's a bit of the same function as do the two discs on a rondel dagger. In fact, similarities to this dagger and the needle are relatively high, and we will use dagger techniques to explain the use of the needle. Unlike the discs of the dagger, the ring works only in one direction, so we will use the needle only downwards, not upwards. As a safety advice, you can get these needles in plastic and in foam, but even the foam ones will still pierce through cardboard, which means they can also hurt you. So you really need to be careful with them. Training daggers usually have a ball at the tip for safety reasons. These needles don't. So let's start out simple and carefully. An angle 1 attack is simply deflected with the left hand, and then the own needle can be used to attack. You can even turn this into a kind of drill, and the same movement also works against an attack from angle 2. That's all from the old books. Instead of using the left hand, we can use the right hand in a similar motion and use the own needle to hook around the arm of the opponent, securing the weapon. The left hand can control the elbow or even perform an arm bar. As before, this also works against angle 2. More complex, we can use the needle itself for deflecting, usually in a crosswise grip as it's shown in the old German and Italian books, and do the same basic motion as before. This will either lead to an arm bar-like effect, or it could also be used to disarm depending how strong the opponent holds to the needle. After defending with the needle, we can also reverse the motion and come to a rather reliable type of disarm for the needle or for a dagger that is also historically well established. As before, this not only works for angle 1, it also works for attacks from angle 2. Now let's assume the attacker is not interested in not slipping along the needle, then he or she could also attack from angles 3, 4, or 5, however you want to count, basically a step from below. We can also defend with the needle and use the same motion as we just did for disarming. We will not disarm in this case, mostly, but get to a wrist lock that can be used for disarming, in principle. And in fact, it doesn't matter in which direction you move the arm, you always will get to a wrist lock that gives you control over the opponent. Much simpler, we can of course also use the left hand to deflect an attack from below and stab from above. And also here it doesn't matter whether we go in one direction or the other direction, we will always have an effect. And you guessed it already, we can of course also use simply the right hand. We will get to a rather similar position than when we use the needle, so a kind of wrist lock, or we can stab with the needle. Let's look at some more advanced dagger techniques. Here, for example, an arm lock. In Japanese words, this would be called a kind of udegarami or onikudaki or kind of shihonage, whatever you like it. It's a figure 4 type of arm lock that can be performed from angle 1 or from angle 2. Especially the Italians seem to have liked this technique especially. There are different ways of locking it. You can either hook your own needle into the arm, you can grab with the second hand, either your own hand or the needle. If we can arm lock in one direction, we can of course also go into the other direction, so a chicken wing type of arm lock. Here it is important to look that the needle of the opponent is not stuck into our body. This is dangerous, but we can find it in some of the German Fechtbücher, so it has been performed like that. In principle, we could perform a throwing technique from this position, hip throw or even shoulder throw, but we haven't talked too much about throwing yet, so I will postpone the discussion of these techniques a bit until we get some of the basics. Interestingly, especially the Italian books not only have all these fancy techniques, they also talk about countering these. So let's go back to our figure 4 arm lock and try to execute it. And now the attacker will grip his own hand or her own hand and draw against the lock to counter it. To counter this counter, we use our left hand in a circular motion. Japanese, that would be mushadori or goshadori. In Filipino martial arts, that would be the snake arm lock. And that counters the counter. We have already mentioned that it's not a good idea to put your index finger in the ring of the needle. As we have now more complex techniques, we can show why. Because if we disarm from one of the locks and the index finger is in the ring, we would basically rip it off. It's not perfect when you have the thumb in, but it's much less problematic when performing a disarm that the needle really comes off the finger and the finger does not get twisted. And it doesn't matter in which direction I disarm. Also, in a chicken wing type disarm, I would basically rip off the index finger or at least break it. So where does this leave us? Yor Forger's needles could be used as dagger type substitutes, and that works well. The thing is, that's not how a lot of people think they should be used or how the use is depicted in manga and anime. So the question here is not so much about whether the needles are functional, because they are, but more of whether they fit to the idea how the character should move around. And for that, other weapons might have been more fitting maybe. So when we look, for example, at the karambit, which also has a ring at the tip, so you can put your index finger in fact, that would have been probably a much more dynamic weapon, and the Thorn Princess could have been the Claw Princess or something like that, which probably would have fitted more expectations. But that's how it is now. So, hope we could inspire you, a bit at least. See you around next time.